Bueno, pues bienvenidas y bienvenidos.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. We are celebrating the Week of Science here in Madrid. And here we have the Mind the Gap, the fifth meeting, as I say. Women, science, innovation. And of course, we are collaborating with Ericsson, with AstraZeneca, with Securitas, and of course here in the foundation, Telefónica Foundation. We're here to see how we are advancing in the field of equality, or are we advancing in the field of innovation, in the field of science, etc. We have to see what physics, biology, geopolitics, with what we call the gap in the field of technology and innovation. How can we go forward with an inclusive and diverse economy? Well, these are the items that we're going to deal with this afternoon. And just let me give you some practical ideas. We have direct streaming on 2 channels in Spanish and in English. And this seminar, as I say, will be available in Espacio Fundación Telefónica, so you can see it as many times as you like. Also, we'll ask you to tweet. And as I say, we will have a round table, of course, at the end of this seminar. And now I'd like to give the floor to Carmen Morenes, who is, as I say, the director of the Telefónica Foundation, la Fundación Telefónica. Well, good afternoon. His Excellency, the Ambassador of Sweden here, and all of you who are following us, as I say, and all of you who are present. This is the 5th edition, and we'd also like to welcome Teresa Riesgo. And as I say, this is the 5th edition of Mind the Gap, and as I say, this is the special week here. And we are delighted that you have chosen to organize this for this week. And as I say, and we want to talk about women in the field of technology and in innovation. And in 2020, when we were celebrating this seminar, we thought it was very complex, right, to organize it because of the terrific restrictions that we had, right, to be face-to-face and to go forward. However, we thought that a year later, how things were going to be, how could we see around the corner? And what we did see is that taking a look at the statistics with regard to what has taken place in the last year, the presence of women have been highly affected by the fact that lots of jobs have been wiped out, and also with regard to labor rights. And as I say, women really have suffered in many places in many countries. And of course, there has been huge changes, I say, in technology that haven't affected everybody in the same way, even though, as I say, the presence on social network, using internet and using technological tools. But as I say, men have had a greater presence in the digital professions, we have to say, compared to the female population. And as I say, there is not a equality there in the field of technology for both men and women. And then, of course, we've had the terrific lockdown, and then, of course, we've seen the caring of older people, of children, of course, has been carried out by women, and this has affected their level of production in their own careers. But as I say, we cannot do without the talent of 50% of the world population. And women must participate in technological development and digital development due to many reasons. Why? Well, because access to the labor world is, well, it'll give you the chance, as I say, to have better jobs. and the role of women in technological development, as I say, is very important that this goes forward without any type of bias. So the presence of women, as I say, is of the essence. In our own projects, we commented on before that our campus, well, we of course highlight the fact that we have lots of women, and we have, as I say, 18% of women. But of course, we have to have a goal, as I say, to grow this number. And in an economic level, if we were able to close this gap, as I say, this study that was run closing the gap, that we would see there would be 230 billion to the GDP on an annual basis. So we understand how important meetings such as this are, and that we all have to work together so that we have women taking part in the digital transformation, in the training on a digital level, so that, as I say, we have a situation of equality and innovation and opportunities, and, as I say, in leadership and in particularly development. In Telefónica, these are the areas that we were working. As I say, so that the position of women improves. I'm sure that the conversations that we will hold today will go on this path, and they will help us to inspire us to work together and obtain the goals that we have set out. I would particularly like to thank the Minister for Energy and Digitalization, and as I say, thank you for your participation here. So thank you very much to all of you. And I would like to give the floor now to the Ambassador of Sweden here in Spain.
Muchísimas gracias, Carmen. Buenas tardes a todas.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Good afternoon to all of you. And first of all, I would like to thank Carmen Morines and the Fundación Telefónica for the terrific help that you have given us in organizing this event. We are really happy to be here once again in this space, this really good area, right, for a forum such as this, and to have people here present face to face with us, yes, which is something new again. And I would like to thank the Ministry also for their terrific help, and particularly Teresa Riesgo, she will take part in the roundtable later on. And also we would like to thank you for the contribution that came from Securitas and AstraZeneca, these companies. They have been working for the last 5 years with us to give visibility to women in the field of innovation and science. And also thank you very much to the Foundation for Oran and the possibility of forming part of the programming behind the Week of Technology and Innovation, which takes part this week, as we have mentioned. And as I say, lots of people are very interested in this seminar, not only the people that are here in the room, but also in streaming. There are lots of people that will be participating in this event. And that shows us the terrific interest that there is in this subject, and we have to continue highlighting the fact that we must promote gender in the field of science, technology and innovation. For 5 years, I say, we have organizing Mind the Gap, but unfortunately, which has been mentioned, we have seen some improvements, but we have the same percentages with regard to female occupancy. So, as I say, we have a long way to go to have equality in the sectors which include, of course, technology and digitalization. Why do we need gender equality? This has been mentioned, but for those of us who are here this evening, you would think, well, it's a question with an obvious answer. But I think it is worthwhile repeating this question over and over again so the message has the impact that we wish and that it reaches all levels of society and all the enterprises, so that they will implement the necessary strategies and make the necessary decisions. Equality not only contributes to improve the productivity and the possibility of innovation in the corporate world, but also it makes a positive contribution to the economic growth and to the synergies in the labor market, to competitiveness likewise, and to create a dynamic society which is creative and innovative, where we recruit the talent of the whole population. The enterprises that don't take on actions of equality will be lagging behind, and they will lose dominance in the current world, in more equitable system. The 60 years is left to get to an equality situation if we don't take the necessary steps fast. And we know the pandemic, as I say, has meant that we have dropped behind somewhat. So now when we aspire to come back to normality, quote unquote, what we have to do is take actions and specific measures, as I say, in order to recover what we have lost over the last 2 years during the pandemic. Now we have to accelerate the change towards gender equality, and we have to avail of the opportunity offered by the recovery funds from the European Union in order to push forward change and to foster gender equality and get rid of, as I say, this gap that exists, and make sure that we do this in a specific and cross-cutting fashion. We have to take actions, and we have to make sure we have a change in the paradigm. And before going forward with the debate and the round table, the presentations, and we would like to salute our Minister of Energy and Digitization. Thank you very much.
Colleagues and friends, first of all, I would like to thank the Swedish Embassy, ABB, AstraZeneca, Securitas, and Fundación Telefónica for organizing this very important event. To all of you participating as well, thank you for your dedication to improving the gender balance in the STEM sectors. Sweden and Spain have common challenges in this area, and many other countries are facing the same issues. By sharing experiences in forums like this, I'm confident that we can find a solution to correct the gender imbalances in the STEM sectors. The need for a workforce with digital skills is increasing, both in the public and the private sector. The IT sector in Sweden is one of the most gender segregated sectors, both horizontally and vertically. This means that significantly more than men and women are working in the sector, but also that more men than women hold higher positions and higher wages compared to other sectors. At the same time, we see that many women who are educated in IT choose not to work in the sector. In 2019, the Swedish government asked the Swedish Agency for Economic and Regional Growth to investigate the reasons behind the gender gap in the IT sector, as well as to suggest measures to address this gap. According to the report that was released last year, the gender gap can partially be explained by norms and stereotypes about the IT business itself. There is this idea in society that IT is only for men, and a certain image of a person working with technology and digital solutions. The report also mentions sexual discrimination, sexism, and unfair doubts about women's technical skills. What this tells us is that there are misguided perceptions about the IT sector in society, as well as structural issues in the workplace that need to be addressed. The agency will deliver a second report next year with suggestions on how to close the gender gap, both in the short and in the long term. My friends, Sweden has ambitions to become a world leader when it comes to harnessing the possibilities of digitalization. We are convinced that our IT companies are the key to realizing this vision, which is why we need to work together to make the IT sector more attractive to women. There is no doubt that a gender-balanced workplace contributes to the perspectives and solutions that are relevant for society as a whole, not just parts of it. Let's work together to make gender inequality a thing of the past in the IT sector and everywhere else. It's not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. With these words, I wish you a fruitful discussion and a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Pues qué importante trabajar juntos, ¿no?
It's so important to work together. We've just put into context the actual situation of the gap in the field of technology and innovation and science. And now we're going to go forward with the presentation from Sonia Contera, who holds the chair for biological physics in the University of Oxford, and she is also deputy director and is very aware of inclusion, diversity, etc. And Nano Comes to Life is something that she has written, and I certainly recommend it. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for allowing me to address you. As you have seen in former presentations, this terrific effort to bring women together to the technological world, to the IT world, and it's a great privilege for me to dedicate my life to physics. Physics is the field, together with IT, where there are less women. During the pandemic, and all my life, why did I study physics? Well, because I was born to do that, but I continue to suffer as a woman in physics, and I'm always thinking, what can I do to improve things? And I like to look for the fundamental reasons behind all of this. We say there are lots of motives why we have to improve equality, right? We've heard this earlier. I've been working or studying, I should say, over the last few months. Where did this stereotype come from? Why aren't there women in these fields? And when we are in the fields, what goes on there? Why do we stick in it? Why do we not go away? Why do we stick with what we are doing, as I say? Okay, I'd like to put up the presentation. Let's begin from the beginning. So the first picture that I would like to show you, a symbol of the most powerful men in the world from a monetary point of view, but just to understand where we are today and why we are there. This book, is behind that. I asked them, what is the book that inspired you most? This is the book that they come up from. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. He was a physicist. And this is the latest edition of the book. And the prologue, as I say, was written by Bill Gates. He is from, Mr. Feynman, Richard Feynman is from 1965, and he solved the quantum electrodynamics. And as I say, he's the physicist that all of us have as well a genius, right, in this field. Without effort, he's always smiling, as I say, a genius that all of us want to imitate as physicists. Now, I'm a physicist, as I said, and I'm going to tell you what physics is all about. It began, as I say, with Aristotle. Even before, it was something that has delved very deep into humanity. And it began in Europe, well, with greater strength, if you like, in the 17th century. And it's an activity that when you carry it out, it really makes you very happy. It fills my life. That's why I'm dedicated to it. It's something transcendental in my life. And in the 17th century, it was realized that taking a look at nature, and you can see there are potential intuitions with regard to reality. Life is complex, as we know, very complex, but we have intuition that allows us to understand exactly what's going on. We have to transform this into mathematics, and it's a mathematic language that's able to describe reality in many cases, and it's able to, as I say, predict reality at the same time. And this tension between simplicity with the basic laws of the universe that create the complexity that we live in and our tense life allows us to create technology, makes us create technology. And the physicist discovers a law, process, well, the human mind immediately says, what can I do with that? It's a process that during the 16th, 17th century until the 20th century, it's a process which was called reductionist, looking for the basic laws and then carry out interpretations of the complexity that we have around us with models which are more or less simple. And these have allowed us to develop the technology that we have today, technology that we manufacture in our heads and that goes straight to the computer. But of course, that has been up until now. Things are changing. And this technology has become more and more powerful. It began in the 18th, 19th century in the Western world, allowed us to dominate nature. It allowed us to conquer the world, to reach the conquering of other countries, other cultures, and colonization itself. And physics and science, as we know, is very simple. We were looking for simple processes in order to feel that we dominate nature. And now we've come to the stage where we can't dominate it anymore. I'm referring, of course, to climate change. And of course, we have from the 19th century, as you see in front of you, up until now, where we are, and we have the existential idea. If we're able to create science in order to be able to survive in the 21st century. And this, as I say, is the science of colonization. And in the 19th century, as I say, we were able to show that the white man was superior to the rest of the races, and that men were superior to women. And here we have, as I say, a Spanish genius, if you like, showing us simplicity and complexity. Let's go back to Mr. Feynman. Now we know what physics is all about. If you Google Feynman, you will see he's the most popular man in the field of technology. Everybody compares him to as I say, what Musk, Best, Thiel, and Feynman teach about the first principles. He is, as I say, the genius of Silicon Valley. Where did he start? Well, when the Nazis were in the Second World War, a great majority of the German scientists emigrated. Many of them were Jewish because they weren't in agreement with the regime. The Fails, which were in Oxford, first Birmingham, then there. They realized they were able to make an atomic bomb with less than 100 kilograms of uranium. So, as I said, a lot of money wasn't put in the project. So what happened? It went to the States, and Roosevelt created the first scientific program with terrific money, as I say. $2 billion to create the bomb, the atomic bomb. Here are the people that were in charge of this project. These were the directors. You can see Heimer, who was, as I say, famous for the theatre, but he had a lot of problems after he had created. Ferdman, Eller Fermer, Hans Beth. All of these, of course, were Nobel Prize winners. They were all German, except for Richard Feynman, who was American, from the working class in New York. And he was very charismatic, a great communicator. There were women as well. Chancy Wu, a real genius, as I say, female genius. She was compared to Marie Curie. And as I say, obtained one of the Nobel Prizes for the work that she came. And Leona Woods, as I say, that worked with Enrico Fermi in Chicago. So this is the context, as I say, where there were more women in physics in those years, from the 40s to the 50s. And there's a peak there of women, as you can see, and then it became stagnant. But that just as when the war was on, when women began working in the labs because the men were at war. And there were lots of, as I say, Nobel Prizes, as you can see here. It was Dorothy Hodgkin, as you can see, who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And then the Manhattan Project, well, we know where we got to Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I've been a long time in Japan, and I was very interested in Japan. They were terrific in the field of technology and intellectual. It's the only country that wasn't colonized and was able to develop, and they still have the culture and infrastructure in the field of technology as good as that of the Western world. It all began in Beijing in the 19th century when the first American boat hit the Japanese coast, the Kurofun. And in 1905, they had an armada, as I say, which was able to defeat the Russian armada. So they made it in that sense. Europe began to fear Asia at that point in time, and it's no coincidence that we ended up with the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombs, as I say. And Hiroshima is where the Meiji dynasty came from, and the modernization processes of Japan, because Japan decided they wanted to learn, as I say, from the Western Empire. So, as I say, the Fritz Haber is somebody else we would like to highlight, the German chemist that discovered ammonia and discovered, as I say, the mass destruction weapons. His wife, as I say, Clara, had a PhD in chemistry, and she killed herself by firing a bullet into herself, as I say. And after seeing her wife on the ground dead, decided to take an active role. So let's go back now to mythology, the rock stars of physics, Newton, Einstein, and Feynman. Richard Feynman, maybe it's not on the same level as Newton and Einstein. And here you can see him, as I say, after the Manhattan Project, after the atomic bomb, and he invented the T-shirt of Silicon Valley. That's where it has come from, because he was cool, as I say, the cool genius that does everything. Meanwhile, the Americans created this new genius, the new power, as I say, based on what was carried out in the atomic bomb.
It's interesting to take a look at Japan, to take a look at statistics, what we saw before about percentages of women in sciences, but I always recommend to take a look at the artists. Take a look at the artists. What do they feel when they're good, when they're honest? They talk about what's happening in the world and they express themselves. They can't help themselves. So a key to understanding what is happening to male identity after World War II, well, that's Japanese writers after World War II. So you have Kawabata, you have Tanizaki, you have Yukio Mishima. Mishima not only wrote, he actually put it on stage. So what does it mean for a country of samurais and geishas, katanas, chrysanthemums, a country that is proud because it was the top technological leading entity in the world that is not Western? What does it mean for a man when in that country a man and a woman confront the West? What is a man in occupied Japan? Well, Mishima suffers a lot because he doesn't really understand it. He is a husband with his wife. He can be at the forefront of very violent movements, and he becomes obsessed with women. What is it to be a woman? What is it to be subject to? All of these writers say that Japan had become more feminine upon colonization. At this point, what is happening to us is that masculine stereotypes of domination begin to be intertwined with stereotypes of the new technological man. The power of the A-bomb, the power of theoretical physics, the power of Richard Feynman, now inspiring Silicon Valley. Of course, Feynman is learning from another genius. He stands on the shoulder of Einstein. Einstein is the first to not wear a suit. He's trying to make it seem that he's not trying. He was always a pacifist, always a pacifist. World War I, World War II, he was not involved in any one of the projects. So here we see Einstein, Yukawa, the first Japanese Nobel, and Papa, who was an Indian physicist. And here is where we see the colonizers and the colonized mingle. Remember, we said before that there was a Chinese woman involved in the Manhattan Project. Well, I'm showing you this slide in order to explain why China. When does China begin to worry itself about tech power? Well, it was a woman who first realized that something was happening. She was in the Manhattan Project and she was a pioneer in physics in China. We see her with Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai, who was Mao Zedong's second in command, and once the atom bomb fell in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course for China, this was absolutely mind-blowing. So China was attempting to recover from Qing, the invasion of Western powers, and this is when it was decided that China would never ever again be an underling to the West. They were to grow in order to avoid colonization at all costs. So here we see them. We see Wu Taiyun, the Nobel Prizes, who are not Westerners, 3 pioneers, physics in 57, and working on atomic energy. So back to Richard Feynman then. Now, I've shown you this slide before. We've heard about this before. Women in science being in 2020 half of the students, but in physics, there's only 30% of us, and that includes chemistry. But if it's only physics, it's 15%. One of the reasons is that in the case of many girls, the idea of that genius, the masculine genius, this is something that little girls don't like. There are surveys, and when you ask little girls, why don't you want to study physics? It's because they don't see themselves as a mad scientist. The most influential book in Silicon Valley, among them, again, here we see Mr. Feynman. But Mr. Feynman was more than a great physicist. He was a misogynist. He did not like women at all. This book, which everyone quotes as their favorite book, includes some episodes which are, to put it mildly, troubling. He gives tips how to arrive at a bar and ask for sex from a young lady, and before convincing the girl, before buying her a drink. And worse, he always bragged about being able to solve theoretical problems, complex ones, in a strip club, on a napkin. Always, always establishing a relationship between his intellectual prowess and the objectification of women as sexual objects. But it's actually interesting. Something else that he used to do was he used to invite his very few women students to draw them naked. But last year was the 100th anniversary of his birth, and in Nature it says he was a sensitive man who suffered the considerable pain that resulted from atomic weapons. So this is, Me Too material, I think. This is going to be very important to tear down the stereotypes. So here, a little bit more of statistical information, which I think we all know about. When we are scientists, they don't include us in papers. We're not invited to conferences. I like to say that I've only been invited to speak in public until 45. Until then, I was, coded by invisibility. It's not that men hate us. That's not it. It's just that when little boys turn 9 and little girls turn 9, they get upon their separate ways, and little boys don't want to lose status. They don't want to be girlified. One of the reasons why we're not invited is because when they organize an event or a conference, what they want to do is they want to be part of the establishment. They want to partake of the power of physics or of science. If they invite a woman, are we toxic? Are we going to be a contagion? As a physicist, I am subdirector of my department. I don't have credibility and I don't have authority. When I tell a student that he needs to put on his lab coat, they never, ever, ever do it. But if my male colleagues tell them to put on the lab coat, it's on in a jiffy. So we seem to lack authority and credibility. Women do not want to catch those elements, those negative elements of femininity. So, the origin of the myths. This is from my friend Regina Lopez, who studied math in the US. Her twin sister is a physicist, and both of them very well known. She recently gave an interview to El Correo and said only 21% of companies in the US and 30% in Europe are led by women. But worse is that 1.7% of funds go to startups in the hands of women. So it's very difficult if you don't have money to do anything, and it's very difficult if you don't have credibility. It's very difficult to be able to raise funds. But if we see what men do, well, it's easy to find companies that don't really do anything, who've been doing nothing for 15 years, but who are raising millions of dollars. And it's men. It's men who are pitching these companies. And again, it's that Feynman stereotype. Men in t-shirts, mad scientists. But in real life, I hope that all of you who have invested in these companies have gotten rich. These women are responsible for vaccines. Here we see the Oxford vaccine, Professor Sarah Gilbert and Catherine Green. They've been working for so very many years. Kathleen Carrico, who for 30 years of her life focused on RNA-based vaccines. Nobody backed her. She didn't even have a position in a university. Thanks to her Moderna patent, Pfizer, well, these vaccines have been created, which have put an end to the pandemic. BioNTech. BioNTech, as we know, is in the hands of Özlem Türk, a Turkish immigrant, with her husband. Both of them are doctors. For 30 years, they've been looking for vaccines against cancer, not only thinking about pandemics. And Kizzmekia Corbett, also, who has research at the NIH, and that's thanks to her, again, that we have that knowledge. So whoever invested in women at a given point in time must be very happy now. And we're not going to talk about the future and how physics is changing, but I do want to think that we have reason to be hopeful. I've said before that, yes, there's Western science colonialist, seeking to dominate nature and other people. Within and without Europe, there have always been persons truly interested in the complexity of life, persons who are a little bit on the sidelines, people who don't quite fit in. So remember the Turing machine. He was a homosexual, and he proved that reality is not logical. There are very many things in life that are not logical, and there we are. It's a complex world. There are so many things that cannot be calculated, and all of them who appear here. Here we see Rosalind Franklin, who researched the structure of DNA. Many scientists focused on complexity. Now, the case of Sir Jagadish Chandra, who was an Indian physicist in the times of the Raj, who left physics when he was at the very pinnacle. Actually, he was allowed to focus on the complexity of nature, biological physics, that which is not technological, that which allows us to understand how physics brings us closer to the reality of the world, how it helps us establish a connection with our reality and with the very complex world we live in. Well, he was the first science fiction writer in India, and I recommend Runaway Psycho, which is a work that savagely criticizes Western technology, Western science. The first person to talk about climate change and who said that men should, at the end of the day, understand that we must be a part of nature, stop waging war on nature, was Rachel Carson with Silent Spring. On her own, with a cancer, dying, wrote a book which was an absolute bestseller and continues to be a bestseller in the US. And she actually was the person who got the conservationist movement up and moving. She proved that science and technology would, at the end of the day, destroy the planet. And she was the person who got all of us walking along these lines. And she followed in the steps of other women. Mary Shelley, the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft. She talked about Frankenstein, did she not, when she was just 19? And then the challenge, as I say, is dealing with the complexities of climate change. A new way, a different way of being a scientist. We've talked about the physics of complexity. We need to understand our relationship with nature. We need to be scientific in a different way, and that's why we need women. Interesting pieces of information. Many men resist green behavior as unmanly. That is what the Scientific American says. No surprise. For over a century, we have been equating masculinity with scientific power that destroys nature. And here are the challenges. Allow me to end on this note. The first Japanese woman to be a scientist was Toshiko Yuasa. As a very young girl, she joined the lab of Marie Curie's daughter. She studied nuclear physics. She had a very difficult life. And, well, at the end of the day, she returned to Paris, and she says something which I think resonates with why I am a scientist and why many of my women friends are scientists. The roots of science stem from a feeling of love that is both broad and deep. When you are a scientist, when you're a physicist, you reach out to nature. Your real creativity stems from love of the planet where you live. And I have found many sentences that are very similar. Concepcion Arenal, the first woman to go to university in Spain, in her epitaph, she said, to virtue, to a life, to science. And Iris Murdoch, the philosopher and poet, love is extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. Love, and so art and morals, is the discovery of reality. I would say, for physics. And let me now end by talking about a woman scientist, one of the first Spanish physicists in the first wave of feminism at the beginning of the 20th century. As so many women, an international woman. From Tenerife, I was raised in the Canary Islands, and a very interesting piece of information which I shared, she studied at the University of Lund. She went to Sweden. So, as a proper Oxford scientists, always requesting funds. We are going to recommend to the ambassador and to the sponsors, please bear in mind Olga Garcia Riquelme. There might be a grant or an award to address the issue of women and minorities, Spain and Sweden. Thank you very much.
Qué interesante, qué apasionante.
This was very interesting, very, very interesting. So many issues have been discussed. We're talking about physics, love for physics. This is something, you know, talking about love, it's as if it were exclusively feminine. And my goodness, Sonia, you shared so many wonderful ideas. Food for thought indeed. And let's now begin to walk the talk, as they say. Sonia also talked about physics, and she talked about biology, geopolitics, gender issues, and she has also talked about the very little money that goes to companies run by women. And this is what we're going to talk about now. I am going to talk now with Daniel Sachs. Daniel Sachs, who is a CEO. I'm going to sit down where I've been told that I should sit down. He is the CEO of P Capital Partners, PCP. He chairs the investment committee, and he presides. I'm sorry, I'm going to remove my mask and I can now be understood. I was saying that he chairs the Daniel Sachs Foundation. Welcome, welcome. So question number one, and this has very much to do with what Sonia was saying, the paucity of investment in feminine startups. The recent information that I've had access to says that in Europe, women entrepreneurs have accessed barely 13% of all of the funds that have gone ever since 2017. This we've been trying to change for decades, I understand, but nothing really has changed. We seem to be stuck in time. So the question that comes to mind for a question for you, what can we do? Who needs to be involved? What steps need to be taken?
First of all, I was very taken by this presentation on physics and love. But I think you're right, very little has happened on the surface, or too little has happened. Progress is very slow. There's no doubt that we need change in a lot of dimensions, in education, in recruiting, in how funding is distributed in the venture capital industry. And I think one of the things that are really important is that we resist symbolic change and that we really work on deep systemic change. And maybe if I can say something about how I work with and think about these issues, in P Capital Partners where I work, and also in Soros Fund Management and Open Society, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these three are different things, and they need to be thought of separately. Diversity, of course, is in a group, in a company, in a management team, in a certain community. How do we introduce as much diversity as we can? Diversity is partly about gender, but gender is, in my view, too limited an approach. We need to think about intersectionality and think about all the partly overlapping identities that form kind of the chain of privilege and discrimination, etc. And diversity is partly measurable, like you just said, how much of venture capital funding goes to women. But a lot of it is too complex as well to be measured. The second dimension is equity. So equity is not equality, right? It's not about everyone being treated equally. It is about giving everyone their means of success, providing them with their means of success. And that varies by individual, right? So I mean, a simple example is if you're in a wheelchair and I'm not, and we enter a building, we're treated equally if we both there's a staircase in front of us, then we're treated equally. But that's not equity, right? We're not providing a solution that gives both of us the means of succeeding. And of course, equity becomes much more complex with diversity because every individual needs different support. Education becomes more difficult. We need to maybe work in different languages. We need to train people differently. And then the third, inclusion, is kind of the real core of it. How do we not only create diverse communities where there's equity, but also make sure that there's equal inclusion? And I think I'm seeing progress in terms of diversity. I see much more female entrepreneurs these days. I see that my colleagues and the people who work for me are taking out parental leave equally if they're fathers or mothers. So a lot of progress in terms of diversity, but still a lot of work to do on equity and inclusion. And that is more complex because it has to do with how do we train in companies as well and in schools. How do we recruit and so on?
Pero en el ámbito...
But as I say, we are seeing that there are more entrepreneurial women. Why is there not more investment in projects created by women? Because these women are creating things that aren't worthwhile. It's not worthwhile investing in them. I don't want to believe in that.
I have, in the last year, I think I've invested in 3 or 4 companies that are founded by women, that are fantastic companies. I can give you examples, but I don't know if we have time. But I think part of it is that some of them are active in ways that is not understood by a very traditional venture capital community, maybe. But let me give you an example of one of the complexities of diversity and inclusion. So, in my capacity in finance and in investment, when I recruit, I always tell the recruitment firm that I want as diverse a selection of candidates as possible. And a few years ago, it was very difficult. It was almost exclusively, dominated by men. Increasingly now I'm seeing women, but there is a much harder process to also get people with a non-Swedish background when I'm recruiting into finance. So I started looking at why is this? And if you look at Sweden and you see the different education institutions, the Karolinska Institute, which is where doctors are trained, 45% of students have a non-Swedish background. And quite a big part of that group has a non-European background. So they've been very good at attracting talent, diverse talent. Whereas if you go to the business schools, like the Stockholm School of Economics, 3 or 4% have a non-Swedish background. So why is that? Well, it starts at a very early age when these kids at the age of 15, 16 start thinking about what to do in life. What are the role models? What's happening in school, etc. So we've started now a program with the Stockholm School of Economics, with my foundation and 10 companies in the finance sector, where we've decided to go to the root of this. So we're going to go out in schools and meet kids at the age of 15 in areas where you have a high share of non-Swedish families. And then we will provide mentorship, internships, workshops, summer schools, and start showing examples, etc. So this is a 20-year project. If we can measure the success when these kids at 15 are turning 35, but in the short term, the results may not be visible. So real substantial change in terms of diversity needs to start early, and it's hard work. It takes time.
Requiere tiempo, efectivamente.
Yes, it takes time. So I'm going to ask you exactly what are you doing to close this gender gap in the field of research and in the Open Society Foundation. But now you have told us somewhat about this. So maybe I could ask you now, what more are you committed to do?
So I work in different fields, not only in business. I also work in politics and civil society. We've started something called the Apolitical Academies, which are really academies to broaden recruitment into politics. So getting young activists, we have a young generation which is more engaged in society and politics than we've probably had in 50 years. And at the same time, if you measure trust and trust in politics and institutions and democracy, it's lower than it's been in 50 years. So that gap is really dangerous. So we've started running non-partisan schools for politicians. Young activists and civil society leaders take a one-year course in order to be able to run for office, to get the tools to run for office and go into politics. And when we look at who's applying there, it's the inverse of politics. So we have an overrepresentation of women. We have an overrepresentation of people with a non-European background. So we find it really hard to find men who are qualified, frankly. And of course, that's because a lot of these people are not feeling that they have a route into politics through the traditional channels. So I think these types of initiatives are really important, and I think this is something that could be done as well in the investment world. Another field where I'm active is in the arts. I own and run a film production company with two partners. They're both women, female producers. We're producing 2 big TV series this fall, one of them for Swedish television, SVT, the public television, and one for the largest commercial station. Both directors of these big projects are female. So we're not explicitly doing this to increase diversity, but some of the best talent out there is very clearly not male, and also very clearly not from kind of a traditional Swedish background. So I think in all of these fields, everything needs to be thought of seriously, systemically, and in a very substantial way. And I think what we should avoid are simplifications, just measuring numbers.
Me quedo, bueno.
Right, well, I just wanted to ask you something else to try and sum up something that you've already said. What is your recipe to go forward with this aspect?
Well, I think and part of it was very clear, I think, in the wonderful presentation that we just heard, in terms of stereotypes and norms, and also laws. I mean, I think in Sweden, for example, we have, I think Sweden is more successful than a lot of countries in terms of having an egalitarian society. In terms of parental leave, for example, we have 18 months parental leave. It used to be that one parent could take the full 18 months. Now slowly there's been a legal increase of the share of parental leave that needs to be taken, that needs to be shared. So 3 months of the 18 now needs to be taken by, you cannot take more than 15 months. One parent cannot take more than 15 months. I think from my point of view, it should be individualized and each parent getting 9 months. So it was kind of in law constituted as an equal right and equal possibility of parental leave, for example. So there are still structural things in the legal setup, in stereotypes and norms very clearly, and that's trained in our families and in our schools, etc. And I think providing good examples at home, in school, in business, etc. I mean, I think the depth of this is enormous, and that's why it takes time.
Vamos a hablar más sobre.
Okay, let's talk about measures later on at the round table. So I just want to really thank you for your time, and just hold on to the idea of a systemic change, an in-depth one, and not just function on what's symbolic. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Pues vamos a dar paso a.
Okay, now we're going to put on a video with a message. This will be from Rigner, who's the executive director of Women and was Minister of Equality in Sweden. So she's going to give us her vision with regard to the global view of gender.
Excellencias,
Excellency, distinguished panelists, participants, friends, many thanks to the embassy in Madrid, the Swedish embassy in Madrid, for giving me the possibility to address you. Technology, from a financial point of view, digital point of view, which has become the center point of our daily life. It's very difficult to think about sustainable development in the 21st century without technology. In spite of the ambitions behind the goals for sustainable development, the gap exists. The gender gap exists, as we know. Half of the women in the world don't have access to internet. On the other hand, we have the perception that the science, technology, engineering, and mathematical careers belong more to the male population. The gender norms, the discriminating ones, begin at the first level of education. And as a result of all of this, even though we know there are certain advances, 35%, as I say, of the students, university students, that are studying STEM careers on a world level are women. And these institutional barriers prevent girls to have jobs which are the highly qualified jobs with high levels in the world, the emerging world. As I say, the pandemic has pointed out not only the inequality, as I say, but also the small role that women play in science and technology, as we've been able to appreciate in the different advances which women led, as I say, during COVID. Thanks, Sweden, for, as I say, the Generation Equality Forum. This was a transforming moment, as I say. It was the first time there technology, innovation have come forward as a gender priority, as I say, on an international level. The government of Spain has taken on ambitious commitments to support action in the field of technology and innovation to build digital societies which are more inclusive ones. Sweden and Spain share the vision of a feminist external policy, and we hope this will help us to build and inspire others to do this. As I say, that would be very, very important. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sin micro, así que a ver si... Hola, hola, ¿funciona?
Compleja.
Ahora sí.
629 17.
¿Perdón? ¿Sí? ¿Se me escucha ahora? ¿Ahora sí?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you. Related to what we have just heard, we have a report from the European Union with regard to equality, gender equality, and Sweden is #1 in the ranking, as I say. This is not new, of course. They were first last year as well. And Spain is #6, right? Which isn't too bad either. As I say, we've gone up 1 point from last year, I have to say, or 1 place from last year. But there's an awful lot to be done as yet, and we're going to talk about that in the round table that we're going to hold now with some of our guests. And we will have young people as well, other people, I should say, join us as well. We have Teresa Riescos, the Secretary General for Innovation from the Ministry of Science and Innovation. Donald Sachs, once again. Marichel Bautista, co-founder and CEO of FibraCat and president of FibraCat TV. And you can take your seat wherever you like, actually. And Paul van Brantinghem. Paul, help me to pronounce your surname. How is it? Brantinghem. Paul van Brantinghem. Well, thank you very much, Paul. And he is co-founder and CTO on the Big Onion Tech and also of Spain AI. Welcome. And the title of this round table which is quite challenging, as you know, particularly with regard to everything that we have to do, actions to accelerate the change in gender equality. And we have to be very serious about this, as I say. And the first question, well, in line with what Daniel has said before, and I would like to hear what the other speakers have to say. Do we need a systemic change in order to be able to close the gap in science, technology, and innovation? So maybe we could just begin with Teresa. Okay, if you can use your microphone, please. Thank you.
No está tan claro.
Vale, ya está. Bueno, muy buenas tardes. Muchísimas gracias a la Embajada Sueca, a la Fundación Telefónica y a todos los patrocinadores.
I would just like to thank the foundation, the Telefónica Foundation, and all the others.
Pero quiero contar solo una cosa.
In Spain, just by way of an example, in Spain, I think that there's something that is very important. I'm a full professor of electronics at the Polytechnic University in Madrid. I was the second full professor of electronics in Spain, which is exotic, I think. But the generation prior to mine, my mother's generation, when she got married, she had to stop working. This is what we had in Spain back in the 1950s, you see? Yeah, in the 50s, in the 60s. Companies, well, some companies, some large companies in Spain, very important companies, when ladies got married, they were directly fired. And one generation after my generation, well, I am a person who devotes her life to something which is, in fact, very masculine: science, technology, innovation. Now I'm doing something else. Now I'm at the Secretariat General for Innovation. And I perhaps will be responsible for some changes that I could not achieve from my other position. Maybe, systemic changes. Spain is now number 6 in the European Union, but we've come a very long way. This is very important. I think that systemic change is definitely necessary, and I think that it becomes with something that happens if you have vocation, if you have digital transformation, which must be something in which we women are not only users of, but also the stars of, if you wish, the developers, because if not, we're going to be left behind. There's going to be such a huge bias otherwise that we're just not going to know afterwards how to correct the bias. And we need for women to not only be here, but also that women be in a position to take decisions in these spheres: science, innovation, and the different digital technologies, because they are indeed very important. And I think that what we need to do is join forces and think about innovation, but from a gender point of view. So yes, systemic change, definitely.
And Marichel, Chel, and Paul would answer this question as well. But with giving you another question as well, just going to go further, because you probably say yes unless you don't want to, and then you can say no and present your arguments. But as I say, let's go further afield than the typical measures that we know about, which is sort of patchwork, if you like, but they could be necessary at the same time, and it's something that we could discuss. Like, for instance, the quotas, as I say, ways of affirmative action, and it's also very interesting, as I say, because if you if they don't like taking a look at quotas because they think, well, women that are there don't deserve to be there. But I think it's something that we should understand, that women should be in those proper positions as well. And how do we go beyond these measures? Really, is what the question I'd like to ask you.
Well, let's see. I think that yes, we need a systemic change, yes, but furthermore, I believe that we in companies should be at the head of that movement. About quotas, I'm going to speak from the heart. Often enough, what I think, let's see, it's not that I don't believe in quotas. I believe in talent, and I think that talent is sexless, genderless. So what we need, I think, and this we saw in the barometer, the Edelman barometer, in the past 20 years, for the first time ever, Spaniards, 61% of Spaniards, saying they trust entrepreneurs, men and women, both now, more than in politicians and public entities. Entrepreneurs are more trustworthy. So I think that as entrepreneurs, we should take a step forward and say, well, let's do something about this. And I therefore believe that what we need to do is start from the bottom, work upwards, so as to ensure that when we're talking about quotas, that we don't need to choose, is it a man, is it a woman? No, what we want is to have enough of a talent pool that we can actually cherry pick. I think that's important. I think it's important to work. I think it's important to join forces, public-private partnerships, so that education hold its way so as to tear down these stereotypes and thus be in a position to select the persons, the human beings, on the basis of their capacity, their talent, their knowledge. But we need, especially when we talk about women in the sciences, insist so that girls, young women, go for those careers, attract that talent, so that afterwards we in the companies, in the corporate world, can attract them.
Yes, we have seen that there is a problem here of co-adaptation. Even though there is female talent in the company, men seem to choose other men, right, when they're thinking about who they're going to promote. And we talk about who do they go out to have drinks with? Who are their mates? So, as I say, we talk about talent, and of course, we have to see exactly the reality. Even though I continue talking about the quotas, I didn't want to focus on it. But as I say, this can be a double-sided sword as well, right? As I say, I think anyone wants to say something.
To say a few words about quotas, because I think it's a really interesting example. I think quotas can be necessary, but I think they need to be thought through very carefully. And I would like to take the Norwegian example, where there has been a quota in the law for listed companies having to have at least 40% women. So when that law was passed, it led to over 200 seats in corporate boards in listed companies needing to go from men to women. When they did the analysis afterwards, it turned out that these 230 seats were taken up by 70 women. So these 70 women got on average 4 seats. They were quite established women, of course. They did increase the diversity of these boards in one dimension, because they were all kind of very established Norwegian speakers, of course, etc. But when you talk to quite a few of them, they say that they felt that they were tokens of diversity rather than fully included. So again, back to what I was saying before, that this is not only about diversity, it needs to be about true equity and inclusion. And I think unless it is prepared in that way, it risks backfiring in a big way. And I think from my perspective, again, if we talk about law, it's much more important for me to pass laws that lead to equalization of parental leave, for example, because that builds from the ground up, and that has the potential of changing the way we interact in an entire organization rather than just changing on the top. You may need to do both, but I think if you put in place quotas, it's really important to think about real inclusion and systemic change.
Por lo tanto, tenemos una primera medida
So we have a first recommendation or a first measure, right? A very specific one that was launched before. which of course is the work-life balance, as I say, the family conciliation. So we are in agreement that society knows that we need diversity and that things have to be done in a fair way, but we realize that it's not done that way. So, so we have to force things, but of course problems arise when you force things. You create friction and you say, I'm here because I'm part of the quota and I know that I'm worth it, but why have they actually chosen me, right? I think Sonia made reference to this before, that they were not she's not been invited to take part in the debates, even though she holds the chair in Oxford University. I don't know if you wanted to say something with regard to the former comment, or Paul, maybe you could talk.
Con respecto a este tema, sí que creo que lo ideal sería de qué manera.
I think it would be ideal to talk naturally enough about the quotas. But it's what you were saying. Sometimes what you have is 90% women in the payroll, but then at the board level, you've only got 10%. So something is happening and it's not meritocracy. Maybe we need to palliate that, to tear down that problem, that endogamic problem. So maybe there, yes, you need to drastically turn things upside down. And I wanted to say something. I loved Sonia's speech. I'm a physicist, by the way, and I loved what she said. I'm the stereotype. I'm your stereotypical physicist. I loved Feynman until I heard you this afternoon. So where am I going? Where am I going with this idea? That's right, exactly. But what I mean to say is that we need what you've done more. We need to hear, we need to educate, to reach out. We need to learn that we perhaps make mistakes and acknowledge it, and maybe next time I talk with my physicist buddies about Feynman, maybe I'm not going to say exactly what I used to say before.
Más.
Okay, very good. Yeah, more measures than we need, right? More training, more education, more activities of all types, right? And dissemination, just like what we're doing here today, right? So we've got these different challenges. And the second item I would like to bring up, and I'm going to begin with Teresa, because it's directly in her field. I want to go further with regard to measure from the point of view of systemic change, from public sector, private sector, and avail of the opportunity that we have today with the next generation funds, the recovery funds, as I said, which are going to be a real injection for digitization, technology, etc., and innovation, particularly because Teresa, you mentioned before that a very important part is how we go forward with the digital transformation, and 50% of the population in the field of this technological development, and also including other disciplines. Okay, I'd like to sum up the question now. How can we make the best of these funds, right, to have a more inclusive economy?
Well, let me say that the government of Spain, all of it, is committed to this happening. There's engagement, there's commitment, and as you probably know, a goodly portion of the European funds actually focuses on digitalization. There are basically two headings that are very important. And with regard to what we're talking about now, we're talking about inclusion, diversification, the digital elements. So one is the strategy that focuses on digital skills, and that includes skills, encouraging boys and girls to be skillful in digital terms. But if we talk about diversity, well, we cannot leave other persons behind. The elderly, the rural populations, part of the population that sometimes, we leave behind, and also
tienen a veces más dificultades.
And persons who sometimes have more difficulties, the persons who have disabilities and can't really be as digital as others are. Something else that I think was discussed back in July was a charter of digital rights, which I think we definitely need to keep in mind. This is very important, and these are important activities in the digital sphere, which, by the way, is not my sphere. I mean, this is somebody else's bailiwick, another ministry's bailiwick, but I definitely keep track, and I'm absolutely convinced that there's a lot of interaction there. Now, from the point of view of science and innovation, what we do is, first and foremost, we have a unit, Women and Science, Mujeres, y Ciencia, within the ministry. And what we do is we coordinate all of the activities that have to do with exactly this sphere of activity. And furthermore, years ago, when we were voted into government, we built an observatory of women in science and innovation that focuses on releasing reports, surveys, and that, of course, includes the ministry, of course, yes, but also the private sector, needless to say, and universities, and so on and so forth. So what is it that we're doing? Well, for instance, we've launched something which is the equality label in R&D centers, which has to be renewed. When you ask for a position, when we want to recruit talent, this label is going to allow us to differentiate among those who have an interest in this sphere and those who do not.
Right. Let's take a look at the parameters, right, behind this label.
This is being studied right now. Of course, we need to have a program in place. We need to have spaces where the activity in question may be carried out on an equal footing, because sometimes this does not happen, you see.
Para los hombres.
Yes, yes, surprisingly enough, it's equal for men, but not for everyone else. Like I do have examples in mind. So this label, which does exist in Horizonte Europa, which is the European research program, which encompasses 21 to 27. There is an assessment of the different projects which requests for an equal rights policy in the requesting entities. So apart from the fact that some projects are rewarded or better assessed when the main researcher is a woman, or projects that include women in the research teams and so on, above and beyond that, the institutions proper have to be accredited in equality. So just as they're accredited in many other different fields. So I would like to say that you have quality accreditations or whatever issues that you are asked to comply with in order to be the beneficiary of that funding. And then in the ministry, we've built a proposal. This is specifically for innovation purposes for the year 2022. There's going to be not a specific call, but there's going to be an amount of money that's going to be provisioned. It's called Neotech. It's a SEDETI for tech companies. 5 million euros are going to be set aside for companies that are led by women. And just as in emissions, we reserve 30% of our budget for projects that, or 40% for projects that are led by SMEs, because we are very keen on that as well. What we want is for SMEs also to participate. So we're going to do exactly the same. We're going to be testing this, see whether this positive discrimination, if we can call it like that. Of course, the evaluation is going to be very good, but sometimes when there's a lot of competition, some projects are left on the sidelines, and we can actually recover them because they are led by women. Yes, this is positive discrimination, and yes, we believe it's very important. We have many, many other more ideas.
Yes, I'm sure we could spend the whole evening talking about these different actions. And also that last measure that you've just mentioned is in line with what we were talking about with Daniel and Sonia with regard to the investment in startups for women or projects led by women and research lines, women in research centres, etc. This is also very important. And I'd like to know, what do you think about the recovery funds to be used to go forward with this? I think, Daniel, you want to say something in that sense, is that right?
Asking for the word. I don't know, I've spoken a lot. I don't know if you... I mean, the recovery funds as such is one tool, but I think a lot of what's happening also in civil society in terms of... I mean, in Sweden, we see extremely powerful and successful networks of female founders, for example, supporting each other and funding each other, etc. There's a festival at the Royal Institute of Technology that's been going on for 5 years, which was founded by the Royal Institute of Technology together with the Swedish pop artist and musician Robin. So it's a tech festival for women and non-binary people. It's been extremely successful. So there's a lot... I mean, top-down is one thing, what we can do in terms of the recovery funds and the kind of public funding. But I think we should also support a lot of these kind of bottom-up initiatives that are coming from civil society and from people active in the field.
Una medida, una propuesta.
Yes, a very interesting proposal and a very important one at that, to support what is coming from the bottom up. Our social society, and you talk about festivals for women, etc., different profiles, etc. But many times when we talk about these items, there's an awful lot of segregation, and these type of events only women go then, and then or there is no initiative from the others. We have an event where we have you participating, Daniel, and you, Paul, as well, because it's very important that there is an agreement and awareness amongst both men and women. And as I say, that vision, that common vision, as I said, of diversity and closing the gender gap is so important. So we have this other measure to support, as I say, several ones.
I wanted to say that apart from being a businesswoman, I do other things.
Crear, por ejemplo,
to create a TV channel, for example, where we talk about science, when we talk about entrepreneurial women or enterprising women, we haven't had a lot of aid there, but in the private companies, as I say, it has been a personal decision to create these points of reference, to think in this case, for example, I believe firmly that the marketing actions to attract the female population mainly, but you'd be surprised, because in the Catalonian area on the TV, we are the second most seen TV station after the public one. And we talk about science and we talk about women, and we have an average of 150,000 viewers per day. And statistics tell us that that men are viewers than women. That's interesting, very good. But reality tells us that this is so positive. And I say it's a private initiative, though, totally private initiative. And one can think that an entrepreneur that would make this decision and would invest their money in this instead of direct marketing to contribute something more to society. I think we should go further afield, as I say, in this decision making from the point of view of the enterprise, where we need, as Sonia said, to ask for aid, for where we need support. We need support to go forward with many initiatives, as I say, within the actual enterprise itself, and where I think we should make a greater contribution to society. And I believe that the new generations, and I see lots of young people here, and I say the new generations, fortunately, are not the generations where women were just in a certain way, if you like. And but I love this generation. This is Z generation, the new generation with a different mindset and different to mine even, and we should be able to work together to bring forward this change. Yes, we've talked about lots of things, right? This support, this working from the base, and I would like to ask you also, you as an entrepreneur, this opportunity that we hear about with regard to the recovery funds, how do you think that this can help? Because with regard to the aids that you've been calling out for, as I say, well, we have to change things undoubtedly. We have to facilitate issues, bureaucracy, red tape. We've got to simplify things in that field. So I do believe that should offer incentives for startups, right? These companies that are just taking off. We talked about the new investors of projects led by women, particularly. They should have greater potential. So we should help there. If the idea is a good idea, because of course that's the basis, well, if it's a good idea, good initiative, we should find the funds to invest in it in the private sector. Well, I am making investments in new companies because we believe in the project and because we believe this female leadership is a differentiating factor. And this difference, as I say, is setting the path to success. There are lots of projects. The majority of them fail, okay? But as I say, we have to put our stakes on them and make sure that this female talent is a differentiating factor. And as Carmen said, and the ambassador said before, if we involve the other 50% of the population, we have more innovation, more productivity, and a higher GDP. So this is good for all. And Sandra, it's a win-win-win situation for all. Paul.
I have to say that I agree with my co-panelists, and I'd like to add something which I think is interesting and which I think also brings us closer to that long-term change we need. At this point, I think practically everyone has a smartphone, browses the web. So, you go to Google, and the AI algorithms are often enough biased because of everything that's happened and that has been happening for a long time. The bias perdures. If you look for dolls, you Google dolls and you get girls 6 to 8, girls 8 to 14. So maybe we should think about investing those funds to mitigate, to eliminate those biases. That cultural change, I think, would perhaps allow us to achieve our objective in technological terms. That could be interesting.
I understand that some of this is focusing on education to eliminate stereotypes and biases. We have to go to the root of the problem, which is within society.
Yes, but you have that retroactive issue. You know that the bias is there, you know what the algorithm is, you know what the data is, and you can try to mitigate and eliminate them precisely so that when somebody looks for dolls Googles that it's not girls who pop up. Maybe it's a little boy, and people will say, oh, wow.
What other measures can we take with regard to this? We talk a lot about the need to have profiles of programmers, developers, which are more diverse, and to have a multidisciplinary talent from the social networks and with the development of technology. Take a look at the databases, make sure they're not biased, for example. and also other measures in this sense. What would you propose in order to avoid a bias? Of course, we talk about audits, right? From the time of the design of the tool and not just later on, right? So what measures would you choose? Or maybe you would choose all of them or more to invest the money?
The EU prepared a draft targeting AI. I think it would be good to do more research. This was in order to help companies understand how to go about this, because many companies don't know how to mitigate, how to do away with those biases. So it would be important again there to focus on information and education. Now, something which is very good about AI is that, and this is something which not everyone knows, is it's always sort of like put into the IT pigeonhole, but that's not the case. I was recently talking with biologists, medical doctors, linguists. You know, it's really a sphere that allows for, sociologists,
psychologists, anthropologists.
Podemos hacer.
So maybe what we can do is include all these sciences there. Now, that would have to include programming being taught in schools. So you could have programmers everywhere. So if you're talking about processing natural language, this is of course very much sought after right now. My partner is a linguist. My linguist is a partner. And we need to work together. We need to reach out to these universities and include this in the syllabus. I think that this would definitely open the spectrum wide, and also, of course, encourage for women to participate in other careers. IT, for instance, I think 8 or 9 IT students are boys, so there's a cultural issue there. We need to look at the root cause, but this will doubtless take more time.
We are seeing that there's a reduction of women actually in computer science. At least on the latest information we have from the authorities there's less women interested in IT now. The more technology we develop and more we need it, less women are there. Maybe we have to change the mindset you talked about, ads for toys, right? When somebody goes to a toy shop to ask for a toy for a girl or for a boy, it's going to be very different what they will offer them. And that, of course, is something that we have to take on board, going back to educating people again. Teresa, I don't know if you would like to comment on something else. As an engineer that I am, the influence of
mucha importancia en
the influence of toys, as I say, will have a terrific effect on those people to play as a child, or to play at caring, I should say. And compared to playing at building things, constructing. So, of course, your mindset then will develop in a completely different way. When one plays with a construction toy, and it's not me who's saying that, by the way, there are studies behind this, they develop spatial vision. And so I can't read maps, for example, that we hear women say, and that we're accused of not reading maps properly. So yes, and I say yes, this is probably true, even though we know that there are some people that will have spatial vision which is spectacular. But for engineering, for example, what is of the essence is that you have a highly organized mind and a spatial vision that will allow you to detect a mechanical part or to design a new way of doing things. So I think that's very, very important. There's something I want to say since I've been here, and I've got to say it, right? It's about stereotype, sorry. And what you have been saying is break these down, yes. Well, I see ads on television, I just really get annoyed, right? This may seem very frivolous, but it really upsets me, as I say. We say a vacuum cleaner, and we see the engineer who has designed it. It's always a man, and he's German. He's always German. So in Spain, we've heard this over and over again. German engineering at hand for you. We've all heard that. But there's Spanish engineering of the maximum level. But what is even worse, that engineer is always a man. Right? And that shouldn't be like that, right? We have to break down these stereotypes. In a Spanish film, if a woman is an IT expert, for example, or a physicist, well, the protagonism is given to the profession, not to what's going on around her. If she's a journalist, well, she'll fall in love, she'll go and travel, she'll have adventures. But the profession requires so much time, it seems. And boys and girls, mothers and fathers, they all see this, and this is a real problem. The role of entertainment, advertising, etc. Break down all of this in all the fields and use the screens that reach millions of people to try and change this. What's really important are the kids, of course. Cerebral plasticity at those ages is something terrific. That's when they develop so many skills, and if girls are not exposed to this, well, then our capacity is going to be different, right? We're going to have more difficulties with certain tasks. Well, there's an awful lot of things cropping up here, right? But I think we've very little time left, though. I would just like to ask a last question before we open the floor to the public. I don't know if I have permission to do that. Who gives me permission? Well, I'll go forward if no one stops me, right? We've talked about this before, but anyway, with regard to how do we change the playing ground in this fourth industrial era, and I think with a lot of responses have come up, but maybe you'd like to give us a last thought. So can we begin then with Daniel?
Three quick thoughts. First of all, you talked about before, both when I talked about these female festivals, tech festivals, etc., you said, but also we need the mixed environments. And I think that's very true. I mean, we need both safe spaces where people who feel that they are excluded can get together and build each other's empowerment, but you also need, of course, the mixed spaces. And I think in a way that's a good symbol of the need for this to be both conscious and unconscious. And you talked about the next generation. So on the one hand, we need to be extremely conscious of these issues. And if being in a position of power, whether you're an ambassador or a business leader or a TV station owner, it's a total requirement to think about these things and constantly talk about the systemic change that we need to achieve. At the same time, we want this to be unconscious, right? We want to focus on talent and not think about whose sexual orientation, what it is, or gender, or background, or ethnic background, etc. And the next generation is a big hope in that sense, because when I talk to my kids and their friends, they're much more blind than we are in a good way to these differences. And then the final thing I wanted to say, Sonia and I spoke a little bit before, and we talked about it also changing in the other dimension, that the young workforce of today have totally different requirements for what a job needs to fill, and they're extremely purpose-driven. And Sonia is happy to be in physics, because physics is changing the world. It's much tougher, I tell you, to be in the investment world, because if you want to attract women and people who have different backgrounds into the investment world, you have to be able to show them that it's purposeful and that you're actually doing something which is good for the world. It's not only about doing a job which is good for you and you're making money, but it's also about how does this change society and what's the purpose of the job. So it's also a much tougher task for us as employers and leaders of the different activities that we do.
Gracias. Por favor, me dicen que tenemos que ser...
Well, you have to be very brief, I've just been told, so if you could just come out with just one sentence. Well, one sentence will be difficult, but anyway. But just to close, but I do believe in the need for for the work-life balance, as I say. So as I say, we know what the fundamental role of women are, looking after the family, etc. We, the women, are the ones who do that. And from the private companies, as I say, and from the public sector also, we must facilitate things so that we don't have to give up our jobs to fulfill that function. And of course the timetable is such an important thing. The working day is so important, and particularly, well, for everybody, but particularly for women. First of all, we have to recruit the talent and get that talent, make sure it reaches you. When we talked about quotas, I would just like to say in my company, there are more women than men. The first telecommunications company where there are more women working there than men. And how did that happen? Well, offering incentives to training, facilitating things for women with regard to the working day, etc. So if I had to follow quotas, as I say, I would have to lay off women to fulfill the quotas. Yes, but the quotas are minimum, not maximum. But anyway, a woman shouldn't have to renounce anything, right? As entrepreneurs, as I say, businessmen, businesswomen, we have to renounce something. But as I say, men have to renounce, but women also. I have nothing to say. I'll just, well, just a little bit if you like, yeah. Just say what I said before. I think that we have to change things through technology. Technology behind, as I say. We're in Google, we don't have these problems, for example. And in electronic commerce, the same, and I'm totally in agreement with what has been said. And just to convince, if you like, I think science, innovation, change the world. You can change the world with science and innovation. So I think the best proposal is, where do we want to get to? Well, it's based on science and technology and innovation. And then it's very interesting task, as I say. It's great. It's great fun to dedicate yourself to technology, and we're seeing the changes taking place thanks to technology in the world. Thank you very much to all.
Bueno, como no vamos a tener tiempo.
As we're not going to have time, I'm afraid, for questions from the public. Those of you who would like to ask questions, we'll have a little cocktail after we complete the seminar, so you can talk to our speakers during the cocktail and ask your questions. And we can finish while we're just changing things around. We have an inspiring presentation now with regard, what does a chemist like you do in a world like this? What are you doing in a world like this, in other words? And this is, as I said, the president of HP for Spain, Portugal, and France that's going to address us, and Italy also. So, where are you, Elena? Elena, welcome. The floor is yours.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, all. I have to say that I'm delighted to be here. Teresa, thank you very much. I admire you having a Secretary General for Innovation. Absolutely wonderful. I know her well, and I have to say that she's absolutely fantastic. So thank you, and congratulations also to the embassy, Mr. Ambassador. Congratulations. I have to say that this initiative, talking about an issue as important as the role of women in science, innovation, and technology, I especially liked the title, Mind the Gap. I'm a little bit English, and when I say mind the gap, of course, the subway comes to mind, the London Underground, and I think, mind the gap. And I think it's important to mind the gap, because after hearing what we've just heard, it is tremendously important to remember that today, we've been talking for years about digital. Technology is increasingly important. Everything is being transformed. There are gender gaps, yes, but it well may be that we not only try to provide a solution to gender gaps, which is what we're talking about today, but that also the digital element is actually broadening that gap. And now I'm going to talk about what I was really going to talk about. I'm worried about this. I worry because when I think about this world undergoing transformation, the pandemic, working via remote, the hybrid world, well, maybe we women will not be as strong as we would want to be looking forward. I think about this when I think about future generations, not my generation. We're trying to do things, but I think that furthermore, we have to remember that we are accountable to future generations. We need to work now for the people who will come after. When I was said inspirational, come with us, I said, oh my goodness, this is going to be so very, very difficult for me. But I think that it's worth it. So what I am going to do now is very briefly, tell you who I am. Well, I'm very normal. I am a chemist. And what am I doing in this world? I mean, so many people have talked about that, right? The Spanish song says, femme fatale, always getting involved in deeper and deeper problems. That's what life is all about, tangling you up, trying to do something new. And that is, at the end of the day, I think, what I would succinctly describe. Why am I saying in a world like today's? Well, because we've heard about a physicist, a full professor, Oxford, the British in me, I doff my hat. We talk about scientists, and we'll talk about that. Research. I live in the corporate world, and you cannot imagine how good it was for me to have my scientific background at this point in my life. What I mean to say is, not everybody who is a scientist has to only focus on the research portion. Science, technology, this is absolutely essential for any part of our lives to understand what is happening in the world, especially in a world that is undergoing transformation. So very briefly, I've been told that I like to jump out of the box, that I've always been a little bit rebellious. I don't think so, but there are people who think I am. So the first thing I can say is that, yes, I decided that I wanted to be a chemist, and I was from a family that really focused on the humanities. And my grandfather was a full professor at Oxford, actually. So I have to say, the humanities, the law, yes, that was my background. And back to a comment that I heard before. My mother, unfortunately, she passed away because of COVID this year. And once she passed, I realized that I would never really be able to tell you how thankful I was for her having spoken to me about the very, very evident reference. She talked about my family, yes, but she also talked about Madame Curie. You can't imagine how she described to me how she had torn down the barriers. She talked about Florence Nightingale. I think everyone in the medical world knows all about Florence Nightingale and Fleming. She talked about people who had really had an impact on the world. And that was why I thought I want to do something. When I was a little girl, I dreamt, not anything specific, but I dreamt. I actually didn't play with dolls. I didn't build anything either. I'm not good at reading maps either. But it is true that definitely the model is very important. The referent parents are so important in helping children build those dreams. So I had my aha moment, as they say, my eureka moment. I finished chemistry. There I was in my department. It was during the rapeseed terrible poisoning in Spain. And I remember one of the full professors I was working with told me, you know what you need to do is you need to get married and then go ahead and research. But, you know, you won't have any problems. Nice and easy. I can assure you, I mean, this was like Alice in Wonderland for me. This was like, what? I was winded. I mean, I really think that's something which is very important for women, science, technology, whatever you have. We want to be independent. This is very, very, very important. It's important to be of sound mind, but it's very important to be independent. And I said, no way, Jose, as they say. And I can assure you that I've said this many times. I said no. Now, my more British part led me to wanting to work in places where I could also travel, which is why I joined HP. HP at that point in time had a department that focused on medical chemistry and analytics, and I said, well, this is where I will be comfortable. And I very quickly came to understand that what I loved was working with people. And it's been the same my whole life. I don't know how to work alone. I can think, yes, I can ponder upon the difficulties, but I love to work as a member of a team. I love to build together. I love different teams. I love people who say no, who argue with you, who think differently. And that was one of the reasons why, you know, at that point in time, I came to understand very clearly. I remember back then, and I'm talking about over 35 years ago, I remember in Spain, a woman alone. I can assure you that at dinner time, I had dinner in my room in the hotel, because anyone who went down to the restaurant, you had, you know, those great gas chromatography, that I sold that to research centers and so on. Yes, but I had a very difficult time of it, because you do come to understand that there's no model for you. There were no women, not in my milieu, not in the tech milieu, not even in these big companies. It was always, you know, a first time. I didn't really know how to behave. And as years have passed, I come to realize that I've had that feeling many times when I was the only woman, for instance, on a board. And here, let me say that I think it was Daniel who said it's very important that you have critical mass. If there's only one woman joining a group, she's not going to feel like she's a part of the group. The effect actually is, you know, that sometimes we behave as the others who are there in the group already. And no, we have a voice, we have a different way of doing things. That's our contribution. So it's been years, it's been 30 years, 30-something years, many years with HP, in different places, in different areas, different departments, with, you know, different regions, different countries, different positions. And I have to say, frankly, that there were good times and there were some very bad times as well.
Points in time when I've said no to. And you think you're better prepared, and the position is given to a male. In networking, for example, because women feel, well, that's a waste of time, right? No. You have to invest in this way. I haven't worked directly under women, I must say, no. And many times, though, you start peddling, if you like, and many years go by. And I remember when you said to me, you've got to talk about women and the issues related to women. And I said, no. And now I realize it's so important to talk to people, to tell them your experience. Even though we believe that we have advanced an awful lot, I have a daughter, I have friends that have the same problems that I have had, that they feel guilty because they don't know how to manage, to look for the work-life balance, right? I had 2 children, and that's the perfect excuse, right, that we always put forward. when we talk about quantity and quality. As I say, quality, we always say it's better, but I felt really bad when I was traveling, for example, and they rang me up to say that my son or daughter was ill, and you feel awful, or somebody rings you up and says there's no milk at home. You say, oh my God, there's no milk, we've run out of milk. Right, and all of you will say, well, let somebody else take care of that. Right, yes, I always say, yeah, let them take care of it. But we know it's very difficult, that, right? It's a real challenge. But something that I always recommend, and I say very often to women, don't feel guilty. To manage this feeling or sentiment of guilt is very important. You have to know how to do that. Don't feel badly. Well, you do feel badly, but you say, right, no problem. There's no milk. Too bad. Let's have a yogurt. Doesn't matter. That's it. That sensation at least has helped me a lot. Working on that has helped me a lot. Other things that have accompanied me, because we go forward. That's the way we go forward, right? It's a journey. You don't think at the beginning. You think, right? You thought, 15 years ago that you were going to be the chairperson of HP Spain. No, but doors open and you have to jump on the bandwagon, because sometimes they close though, don't they? But don't worry, there'll be others that will open up. There's a marvelous book, as I say, which should be on your bedside table. Depends on you. The circumstances, you don't change them, as I say. How do you take these on board, as I say? It's a book by Viktor Frankl. I have seen restructuring. Well, I've had to actually involve myself in them. There have been crises, the internet one, the crisis in 2007. 2008, yes. How do you manage people? How do you motivate people? That's always the greatest concern. Things that have accompanied me as I've been on this journey. I always look at the seas. Maybe it's a good way of creativity, for example. So looking for something new, innovation, right? That we've heard so much about. We innovate, doing different things within the companies, new procedures, new ways. Look at things with a new viewpoint. I think that's one of the most important items, and these careers, the STEM careers, really help you. They help you to question things. We're in a world where we need to know how to ask questions, because the responses we have in internet and technology, know how to ask the questions and dare to ask the questions is fundamental. Curiosity. It's what I say to everybody, and to my grandchildren who are very small, but I say it to my kids as well. I see the level of curiosity they have. They ask you why this, why that. Curiosity will make you read, look at things from a different point of view. This weekend, for example, you'll say, wow, apart from the Halloween parties, etc., I have been reading about origin. How can I say it? The origin of man. In other words, when he goes from being a primate to a man. And you'll say, why? I would encourage you to read about it. Mendoza is somebody also who did a lot in that field. Why? Because I'm trying to extrapolate things. What differentiates from the machines? What is it? What is essential about machines? And that's why I wanted to read about this. You say, okay, things that will connect up. This is what we do with our minds, as I say. This way, the technology, automation, and these are sectors that are not related. Of course they are. The banking world, how's it changing? When you have a technological background or scientific background, and when you have that level of curiosity, that's what is of the essence. And you really enjoy that, because you're always learning new things. And life is far more interesting. And I think today there are terrific possibilities out there. You have to be consistent about things. It's a world where you have to work really hard. Resilience is so important, right? You've got to do things, try things. You fail, try again. There's something which is fundamental, though. The best critique and the person who is hardest on you has to be your good self. One knows when you have made an effort. You know when you've made an effort. It's not that somebody pats you on the shoulder. No. I said, this is the important part. Know yourself. Collaboration, working with others, is so important. What's great about human beings is their potential. In my case, well, I've been fortunate enough to have a team, a very numerous group of people, but to be able to discover the actual magic of each one and help them to develop their potential, that's the terrific sensation of contributing. And that which helps our self-esteem, knowing that you've contributed to, for example, the development of somebody, to attract or to bring, I should say, a technological center to from the United States to Spain, to have the best team. That's what helps you. That's your sensation of contributing. And then, of course, coherence is so important. Why do I say this last? Going back to the C's. Coherence is essential because you have to have values and make sure that you practice them. It's like swimming. It's like swimming. If you swim and you keep swimming, you swim better and you feel more comfortable. Yes, you're being selfish, if you like, but because when you go to bed, then you know you've done what you've done, so you sleep well. You're not thinking things out at night time. So what is important is to feel at ease with yourself, have a good conscience, take a look in the mirror. And I say this not only for women, for everybody. But many times we don't realize it, but we are very tough on ourselves. But if you practice those values, you'll feel good. You'll feel good. And that self-esteem, that self-confidence, which is particularly in young people, is so necessary. When you are young, you need it, as I say. But you don't need a boss to tell you that. You need to be able to tell yourself that. And then this is a great strength for you. We're in a world which we call nuka. That's what we said before. It's volatile. It's very complex. It's global. And after that, we have seen how vulnerable we are, right? How something has just put us all off, right? And we see that the technology world is changing everything, though. And we have to see how we adapt to it. 3 items I would like to leave you as recommendations. We have to understand, and in this sense, it's a message, particularly for women. We have to understand that in this world, technology offers many opportunities, many challenges, but you have to understand that language. We have to understand the language of technology. If you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, an engineer, if you're a manager in a company, the language of data is what's going to determine the world we live in. And we have to be there. We can't allow ourselves to be left outside. These algorithms, as Paul said, we can't let those algorithms only be something that has been designed and produced with all the different biases. And the goods that we have can't be for 50% of the population. We have to form part of the world that we live in. And then the second piece of advice that I would give you, it's important to understand the new English, if you like, the technology. Everybody knows English, and they should know English, and they have to improve it. They have to understand technological language, and it's so important. The STEM careers, I like to put in A in their STEAM, the A behind creativity. It's a hybrid world. We need the two worlds. Ongoing learning, as I like to say, or the long life learning, as we call it in English. This has come to stay with us. It's not enough just to have a university degree. We have to continue learning and unlearn and learn and learn, unlearn, learn and learn. Try things out. You never should have the sensation that you're not going to make it. This is part of living with what you want to do. In the companies, we have a job to do, which is reskill our people. And we have to understand that it's not only education, but it's also training. And the individuals, men and women, have to take on this responsibility. And lastly, something which is very important that has been said, it's a world of opportunity, but there's terrific concern, particularly amongst the young generations. It's what we do is of terrific use for the world. Not everything goes, as I say. What we do as individuals has its consequences. Helping in education, helping those who have less possibilities, making it a fairer world, a more inclusive world. And women have a great opportunity there. And that's why it's so important when we talk about sustainability, which is the buzzword. But in that world, we need women. And I believe that it's a great possibility. And lastly, and I'll finish here, I would like to call on you to take action. We as women, and I'm asking for the help of men and from the future generation. I see lots of young people here amongst us. We have to be less viewers, less spectators, if you like. It's not enough just to think, to say. What you have to do is take action, because we are going to be recognized for what we do, acknowledged for what we do. And we as women have to go forward with that great courage that we have to have. We have to have the courage, I say, to understand where we are and what we have to do. Ask for help. Try and do things, as I say, and I said at the beginning, I was probably influenced by the video I just saw. We're just part of the chain, as I say. We have to leave to the future generation a smaller gap than we were given. And I'm not really clear about the future, right? Because if we don't take actions, that's not going to be solved. That gap is not going to be reduced. And as I said, I'm a normal chemist, if you like. But I would ask you, as I say, to understand that we have to make this world fairer, more inclusive, and we must do our little bit, as I say, the butterfly effect. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Elena. Those are the takeaways then. A call to action to all of your good selves here with us, to those of us who are with us via remote. And it's not only a call to action, it's also a request that you engage in science, innovation, technology. We hope to have inspired you. We hope to have attracted you to this side. And also, bear in mind that stereotypes need to be torn down and that a deep systemic change is absolutely essential. So food for thought. And I hope, as Elena said, that all of these ideas crystallize in action. Thank you very much. And I do look forward to seeing you again.